Good morning, everyone. So my name is Chris Lodge. As you can see, I work at TRL. I'm here today to talk a bit about the Digital Local Roads project, which concluded at the end of last year. And I'm probably going to start by talking about the concept of a digital road and what that means. So if we think about digital roads, it's a concept that's been around for a while now. National Highways have their own strategy for the strategic road network. Fundamentally, it's a concept of using data, connectivity and technology to improve not only the way we provide services on the road network, but to provide new services and to make better decisions and integrate more systems together. We wanted specifically through this project to look at local roads because they are the roads on which most of us live and work, and they're the vast majority of the UK's road network by length. Unlike the strategic road network in England, there is no equivalent strategy to harness digital transformation on the local road network. And this project was the first step on that journey to determine what we would need to do by 2030 to be sort of digitally fit for purpose in a local roads environment. So how do we go about doing that? We talked to over 80 organisations, including a lot of people I saw last night and I can see in the room today, from across the transport sector and beyond, through a series of structured workshops, interviews and an online survey, to get their views on the future of digital roads, what challenges they were facing and what benefits they saw. And I want to point out that TRL did this research, but it was very much a collaborative project. So it was shaped, managed and funded by the TTF, by ADEPT, Innovate UK, TRL, Ringway, Finchley Highways, Jacobs and the Ordnance Survey. So it's very much, and I'll return to that theme of collaboration later on. So the first thing we talked to the stakeholders about was what's actually driving the need for change in the transport sector. And probably some of these aren't going to be a big surprise. The first one was budget. So we need to find ways of achieving cost savings and also delivering new ways of doing business, new revenue streams. But also the way that we move around our local roads is changing. People are moving more towards active travel, which is changing the pressures on our infrastructure. We've had some really good presentations today already that highlight the challenges that come with that and how we can use data to overcome that. But we've also got new ways of getting around. We've got connected and also automated vehicles. We've got micro-mobility modes like e-scooters starting to hit the market. One of the other things was the need for a long-term vision. A lot of our stakeholders saw the need for a longer-term vision around the digital roads concept that overcomes the short-termism that can come with electoral cycles. You're focusing on filling potholes rather than strategic thinking. Across the transport industry, we have access to a lot of different data. There's a lot of value in that data, but one of the drivers for change is finding ways to exploit that and use that in a way that respects privacy, that enables new ways of doing business. And the last thing is around skills. So local authorities tend to have an ageing workforce, and by achieving a measure of digital transformation, there is a drive here to attract new talent, retain new talent, and look at different ways of working across the sector. So that's sort of why people were interested in making changes looking at digital roads as a concept. So what did our stakeholders see as the benefits? One of the top ones was user experience. So the advantage of using digital platforms is that you can help users make more informed choices about their journeys. But there's a reciprocal benefit to that because you can use that data in turn to start planning your network, think about how you achieve efficiency and what advice you give to those users and shape behaviour through that. Asset management was another key thing that came up through our engagement. So using both historical data and real-time asset monitoring to determine new maintenance plans, to use machine learning and AI to determine how we could more proactively improve assets on the network and achieve cost savings and reduce risk in that way. Unsurprisingly, environmental concerns were at the top of what our stakeholders talked to us about, and they wanted to look at ways of using data and better decision-making to save carbon emissions, to reduce local air quality exceedances. There's also this social element to using more digital platforms, so getting more instantaneous feedback from residents about the services that they use, the services they engage with, to make sure that what we're offering is tailored to them and that they understand the options available to them and the benefits to using those services. There are also some things in here that I want to highlight. There were some differences, of course, between the attitudes of local authorities and technology providers and other sectors. And one of the really interesting ones was that local authorities didn't see significant economic benefits to digital roads, which I think makes a lot of sense when you start to think about it and takes me on to the challenges with digital roads. At the moment, the concept's quite high level, especially on the local road network, and that's what we're trying to address through this work. And I think the principal challenge that that brings is that the return on investment from digital roads isn't immediately clear. We're talking about an enabling layer, quite a high level concept, and it's hard to see how that's going to make a material difference in a time of shrinking budgets to the challenges that we have right here and now and we need to deliver as local authorities. Coupled with that, there was a perception that digital roads is all about equipment and technology, that it's about rolling out expensive systems and installing new equipment at quite a high density along parts of the road network, which is a big outlay in cost, for again, an unclear return on investment. Something we saw a lot from technology providers was concerns around collaboration, so the ability to collaborate across both regional boundaries, but also within local authorities between different sectors, different services, different departments. In the transport sector, standards are vital for all of us. TRL over the years has been involved in a lot of different standards, but they move at a pace that at the moment is being outstripped by both technological and societal change, and our stakeholders thought that in some cases those standards in fact were stifling innovation. And the last thing they sort of highlighted as a barrier, which I think is really important to highlight, is insufficient skills. And this isn't just not feeling like they have the right skills to exploit digital, but it's also the decision-making process. So it's how do you sort good solutions from less good solutions and ensure that any investment you make in digital technologies actually provides the benefits that you need for your local residents, for your transport users. So it's that ability to sort of cut through that noise and pick what's right for your local area. So what do we want to do about all of this? I've covered in quite short detail what we found through the stakeholder engagement. The report is on the TTF website and it goes into a lot more detail about the questions that we asked people, including did they like the name Digital Roads. There's some interesting reading in there. But I want to move on now to our vision for 2030. How do we actually achieve some of the benefits that we've talked about? And how do we overcome some of the barriers that the stakeholders raised? And what we chose to do in this project is look at what would 2030 look like if we were more ready for digital local roads. And that would look like local authorities having the right skills to benefit from digitisation. And that isn't necessarily having hordes of data scientists. That's about having the right skills to deploy the applications that you need and maintain and use them. But critically, it's also having better routes to procuring digital solutions and to cut down a lot of the thinking and uptime that needs to go into that at the front end of those decision-making processes. Critically, budget. All of my slides, I think, have budget on at some point, which is no surprise. We need to think about not only how do we make business cases around digital roads and build that experience and share that experience, but we also need to think about the new commercial models that data, connectivity, technology can allow us to exploit. And that actually allows us to achieve not only cost savings, but also potentially generate revenue. In terms of strategy, we need to think of digital roads and the digital concept as part of our business as usual approach to everything. You know, I've said roads and I keep saying digital roads, but the digital roads concept is more than just transport. As we start to hang sort of digital concepts off of that road backbone, it can touch everything from adult social care, town planning, through to education. And we need to think about how we use those digital services to enhance what we're doing at a wider strategic level. We'd also have a strategy that would allow us to collaborate more between local authorities, between different areas to achieve those goals. And I think technology has a role to play there. So we've seen today, and over the next 2 days of the conference, we're going to see even more examples of fantastic collaboration between the private sector, national government, local government, to achieve new ways of getting around, new ways of using data, new ways of optimizing our network, making it safer, reducing emissions. And we need to continue that trend and accelerate that and develop a series of common tools that allow us to share best practice and different data sets across regional boundaries, but also between different companies and different parts of the industry. The last thing is data. So there's increasing access to more real-time data or more national data, but we need to accelerate that progress if we want to achieve a more complete vision for digital roads and digital local roads in the future. We need to make sure that we're sharing that data critically, not just across different authorities, but also between the different road networks that operate in the UK. We need to make sure that if we're deploying systems that rely on the consistent user experience, that that transmits across the strategic road network, local road network boundary. So what happens if we don't start to move towards that vision? You know, it's 2023, we're actually quite close in real terms to 2030, so we need to start moving pretty quickly. So I wanted today to start to think about what would happen if we don't actually achieve this. And I think there's a real risk, I've picked 4 things here, but I think there's a real risk that we have a fragmented future. So I'm more convinced, having involved in this project and having more exposure to the TTF and other projects than ever, that the UK has some really world-leading examples of technology and pilots, feasibility studies, scale-up programs across the country. But there's a real risk that if we don't think about how we achieve national consistency and scale them up beyond the regional level, that we'll end up with a fragmented user experience, by which I mean you can travel from A to B and you can have a best-in-class solution in both places. But if they work in a different way and the user experiences them in a different way, then there's an inherent frustration with that. We need to think quite carefully about public image. So there's some examples that, for various reasons I won't go into, that are in the press at the moment about different transport solutions or technologies that have fallen foul of public image. We can argue about the merits of that. But if we don't have a 2030 vision, we won't be able to address people's legitimate concerns about things like enforcement, privacy, and sharing more data. And in turn, that means that people may turn against either part or the whole concept of having a more connected road and a more sort of digitised local environment. The other risk that ties hand in hand with that is deepening divides. So the government have recently published a strategy about wireless infrastructure and how we improve connectivity for broadband and 5G. And if we think of the levelling up agenda, we think of economic disparity across the UK. If we don't have a consistent vision for digital local roads, we run the real risk that rather than enhancing public services, they actually deepen the divides between areas that are the haves and areas that are more towards the have-nots. And I think what happens then is you have users who aren't engaged with their local area, who have worse economic and educational outcomes because they don't have access to digital services that might be more prevalent in other areas. And I think the last one is about direction and reactivity. I think there's a risk that if we don't start to think about this in a collaborative and cross-industry way, that we are developing solutions in response to problems that have arisen rather than having a proactive strategy that thinks about how digital can offset the problems of the future. And that means that we have a time lag in addressing those challenges. So what's next? We're looking now across the steering group that I mentioned and the partners about how we move this project forwards, what's the next phase. And one of the things we talk about in the report amongst our action plans is a national strategy, or moving towards a national strategy. And I just want to pick sort of 3 areas today where I think that could help with the challenges that we've identified for this stakeholder engagement and the experience that we've had through the project. I think the first thing is direction. So we need to focus really clearly on the solutions that we want to scale. We can't do, digital roads is too nebulous and too large to be able to do it all in one big bang. It's not possible and it wouldn't achieve the right outcomes. So we need to think very carefully about which solutions we scale and how we achieve consistency across the UK in scaling those solutions. We also need to make sure that we're putting public services at the heart of the strategy. We need to be careful here that we don't allow a focus on the most commercially viable solutions to take us away from developments in what is very important national infrastructure. Local roads are already a huge part, a critical asset for us, and if we start to hang more digital services that touch more than just transport off of that backbone, then we need to make sure that we have some control over how that works from a civic perspective. But that isn't to say that collaboration isn't really important here. So I don't have a vision of a strategy, and I think the team would agree with me, that is the government imposing its vision on the market, or the market doing what it wants without any guidance from government. This has to be about us working together, and I think the TTF is a great example of that. Our project was a nice little microcosm of that collaboration. Because the market-led innovation and a lot of the things we've heard today is really important, but we need to make sure we inject into that real clarity on what our needs as a society are. What do we need from transport? What do we need from local roads? And once we have that vision, then we can allow the market and partnerships to innovate in that space. A key part of that is new business models, new ways of working together. There is not a huge pot of money that we can access to start implementing these solutions. We need to think about building up new ways of working together, both commercially and in terms of integration, to achieve more benefits and to self-fund some of these solutions. And the last one I want to touch on is community. So people are at the heart of transport. And when we talk about data and technology, it's actually quite easy to overlook the user experience. And I think the key benefit from having a consistent digital local road strategy, or starting to form one, is that you have a positive message about digital roads. There's a real opportunity here to harness data, connectivity, technology to improve people's lives. And if we don't have a consistent message there, then we allow very legitimate concerns over things like safety and privacy to counteract that narrative. And we need to be ready with a positive case to make about why this is an important thing and why local residents and people travelling on the network should care. So I'm nearly finished now. I'm just going to finish on this slide to talk about what's next. So I've talked about what we found in the first phase of our work, what our stakeholders thought were the key needs to make changes, what they thought the benefits were to digital local roads, and what they saw as the key barriers. To start to try and address those key barriers, we've set out that vision for 2030, but at the moment it's very high level. This is not meant to be solving the whole problem in one place. This is moving towards a solution. And we're starting to look at what happens next. What do we do next to drive this work forwards? Some of the options that we're looking at are things like a digital toolkit to help local authorities make decisions around this. We're also looking at whether more focused strategies could be a useful way of scaling up some applications. So rather than looking at the whole country, we look at either specific regions or we look at specific applications and start to feed off the initiatives that are already going on. So My last sort of thought today, hopefully you've taken some useful stuff away from this, but what I'd like to say is, myself and Carla Jakeman from TRL are here. Carla was involved in the previous work. Please come and speak to us in the break, come and speak to us at the networking event. I'm interested in all of your views. I'm interested in seeing how we continue to collaborate to drive this forwards. I'm interested in whether you think this is a worthwhile endeavour or not. There's a lot of useful challenge around the digital roads concept because it is so nebulous in some ways. But I'm convinced that we need to work together to form a more coherent vision for the reasons that we've spoken about. And I'd be really excited to talk to people about how we take that forwards and what that might look like. So that's me for today. I'm happy to do any questions now, or people can find me in the breaks. Okay.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, a really interesting piece of work. And to pick up on one of the words that Chris used there, which I really liked, microcosm. This piece of work really was a microcosm of what the TTF is all about. Collaboration across the sector, public and private sector, to try and tackle an issue and come up with a solution, come up with some thoughts around that. So really great piece of work. As he said, please speak to him or Carla from TRL in the break. The report is available on the TTF website. Please have a look at it, and it has a call for action in it. Please think about that. Right, without further ado, I'd like to move on to the next working group, which I think Steve is starting. So this is the UTMC group. Steve George will explain what that's all about. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, Steve George here. I'm chair of the TTF working group for UTMC, and I'm joined by my colleague Mark Cartwright, who's currently the UD chair and technical director for UTMC. So, starting point for where we are today. This goes back to last year's TTF Conference held in Liverpool, which gave us the opportunity to pull together what I call a reformed UTMC development group. This was largely by invitation to people and people who literally attended the conference on the day and wanted to join in with this process. I say a reform group because the actual last meeting of UDG formally was around about 2018. And members of UDG at that time have now long gone, basically. Many have retired, people have moved on to different roles. So it was an opportunity to reform the group and to repurpose it as well. And that attracted about, I think it was, 28 attendees that came to that particular meeting. What we got from that meeting was a very clear message, and this is what we wanted from them, that was that UTMC is still relevant. It's still in widespread current use, and the principles of standardisation or open standardisation are still very relevant to local authorities and to industry. But of course, with a long gap in UTMC development, it's no longer optimised for our current requirements. So things have moved on. Businesses, technology is evolving, developing all the time. So we need to play a certain amount of catch-up before we can move forward. And that will be how we redefine the interoperability framework for traffic management based around a new core group of UTMC standards. So the output from the group, it enables us to gain a really good picture of what is required from its community. So we need to make sure that we're working in full context with our community. We need to open links with a wider range of organisations, which we have done. We've been talking to ARTSM, Topaz, Arctic, and so on. And also to be sustainable and basically realistic in what we can achieve and deliver. We need to show it's working, and we also need to focus on functionality as well. But we need to tread carefully on this, and this is what shaped our output for our work programme for this year, to make sure that we pace ourselves correctly on this. And this was presented back to the TTF autumn update last year. At the autumn update, we gained another 31 UTMC members. So giving us a group now around about 60 people who will hopefully contribute to future UTMC development. The autumn update also delivered to us the golden spatula, which Andy presented to us, which sort of provided a split really for the spatula group. So the spatula group can continue with technical development, whereas UTMC we focus more on operational and functionality and delivery of the principles of spatula. And this has led on to an immediate piece of work, which we did earlier this year, which is the digital controller interface specification, let's get that correct, which is a consultation exercise we ran through UTMC through February and March this year. And many of you in this room will have contributed to that, and which we gratefully thank you for. I won't tell you more about that because this forms part of Mark's presentation, which will follow on. But the important thing for me at the moment and for this conference is to look at the governance of UTMC. We've got this group of 60 people. What we really need to do now is find out how we effectively use that resource for UTMC going forward. So do we adopt the same structure we had before with the UDG group and a wider working group, or would we have some other model that we can develop on that? And that's the question that we're going to be asking today. And we've organised a breakout meeting at the end of the conference for all those interested in UTMC to come along and discuss this with us. We specifically invited a lot of people who are at obviously in the current UDG group to join this meeting. So hopefully we'll get a good outcome from that as to how we move forward. And you're welcome to join us there. I understand that's going to be held in the Magnum Room on the 4th floor, so immediately after the conference. So as soon as we finish, we'll go over there. That's a quick run through from me. I will there put you on to Mark, who will run you through the detail of our work programme.
Yeah, clap, Steve. You might not clap me. That's always a risk. A bit more, I think, than a run through of the work programme. What I'd like to do today is to recap some of the stuff that we spoke about last autumn, slightly different audience, so worth doing. Reminder what UTMC is all about historically and now, before getting on to a little bit about the work programme and how it needs to work. So, those of you who have been around for as long as I have will remember the UTMC glue diagram. This was as originally, more or less originally, framed in 2003 or something like that, back in the dark ages. And it was conceived as a thing by which different technical aspects of traffic management could be linked. And what that turned into was a means of, or a structure of standardizing data packets, for want of a better word, that could be exchanged between these things in order to enable some kind of collaboration. So a very systems-y kind of view. This is just a reminder of what I said in the autumn. Nothing new here. There is an increasingly robust range of technical standards and specification available. This is true. You know, systems have moved on, standards have moved on. But following our sort of historical progress, you know, we started off very much knitting at the bottom level, making sure that communications networks were able to exchange. Then we moved up into the data layer. We now need to move up above, I believe, the technical specification layer to look at, as Steve was saying, more operational, functional matters without getting too forceful about it. But, and this is a little bit schizophrenic from our side, we can't just jump away from the current specification. UTMC is still widespread in its technical instar, and we need to make sure that the relevant bits of that are sustained and given a place to live and develop. Some of that will be necessarily under our control. Some of it we will hopefully be able to package off to people like Topaz to hold and manage in a more focused way, while thinking about the what happens next. And I'm very grateful actually that we follow on this presentation from Chris's, because I think what we have in UTMC as the concept that I now envisage is very much an answer to a fair amount of what Chris was saying was the challenges. I think that it would be rude to categorize it quite so simply as this. The challenges that Chris put up about digital roads, budget, functionality, integration, skills, all that stuff, is stuff that we've known about for a while. What we do about that in terms of building digital roads is not clear. He's given a vision for where we might be in 2030, but what does that mean in practice? How do we get from here to there? And I think that UTMC, as I see it, is part of an answer to that. It's not at all a whole answer, but it's part of an answer. So the point of UTMC today, I think, is to, and again, these are things that I think I showed in the autumn, are to provide a link between the policy and requirements of highways authorities as the users and benefit creators of, I'll say, transport management rather than traffic management systems, and the suppliers of systems whose development work, whose designs and whose functionality enables these to happen. And that happens across a whole range of more or less stovepiped application areas, whether it be traffic control, parking, cameras, and so on. Now, UTMC is and remains an ITS concept. So that means that the way we think about these things is in terms like this: architecture, standard specifications, functions, data, users, security, and so on. And all of those things, in order to be able to be implemented, must have a technical definition. That's fine, that's on the supplier side, but they also have to be reasonable representations of the real world. And the buzz phrase around that is digital twins. And digital roads is a version or a type of digital twins, but it's not the only one. And the point I want to make about digital twins is they are not new. We have digital twins all around the place. Not necessarily very good ones, but they're there. All right, so there's a development process which is more incremental, more evolutionary than maybe the buzz phrase digital twin would suggest. Now, when you're thinking about digital twins, there's a few things you need to get ticked off before it makes any kind of sense at all. First of all, what are we building a digital twin of? Secondly, what are we building a digital twin for? It's got to represent something in the real world, and it's got to be there representing a thing for a purpose. And there's also an important thing, which is whose digital twin is it? Who actually owns this representation? And we don't know at the moment what that means in terms of a 2030 vision, or in our sense, a 2022 and 2023 and beyond vision, what that might look like. So, in terms of Chris's observations about digital roads, we have digital roads in that the data in your systems about roads collected together is a digital representation of that road at a certain level of granularity and representing a certain type of things. And you use that to do things like make sure your traffic signals are set up properly, give vehicle actuated warnings about speed, give routing information, and so on. So there's functions built on top of the digital twins, but they don't work together. So I like to think of digital twins as being not a unique thing. There's not a thing called the digital twin. There's a whole bunch of little digital twins which connect together or might connect together. So it's an assemblage. Simple case, if you take of as being a signal controller, I want a digital twin of a signal controller. So that's a representation of the meat and potatoes of where a signal controller is, what its config is, how it's working, and so on. The for would be for something like asset management or fault management. I need to know where it is so I can go and fix things if necessary, and if I need to go and fix something. And it belongs to the Highways Authority, built by the supplier. So the very simple representation in your asset management system or a fault management system of the signal controller is its digital twin. And that means that that data is or should be available for other purposes. A more complicated example, and then more in the digital roads section, would be this. Suppose you need to make an of the road section, but for is pavement maintenance. You need to know about the potholes. I would like to know whether I need to go and fix things. How do I get the data for that? Well, there's a whole bunch of possible mechanisms, some of them involving the kind of things that Andy's group are talking about. Can I get connected vehicles to suck out information out of, and by that I mean including bicycles, about the status of the pavement, so that I can go and do something with it. So there's a function, there's a purpose, which is pavement maintenance, and I need to have a certain amount of information about that road network in order to do that. That's also a digital twin concept. A third one, same road section, different purpose, congestion management. You then get your information from your loops and your cameras and whatnot, and so on. So all these things are digital twins, and there are lots of others, many, many others. So rather than the traditional glue diagram as being technical interfaces between systems that sort of say they're there to do stuff, I would like to recast UTMC in the future, and maybe UTMC isn't the right phrase for this anymore, but it'll do for the moment, as a way of linking digital twins. Why do I want to link digital twins? That's a good question. I don't know which digital twins exist and can be connected, which ones exist and ought to be connected, which ones don't yet exist but could and would benefit from connection, and so on. But the UTMC is still holding to its principles as being an interoperability, a connectivity, an integration purpose. So I would recast our mission in this kind of way, to work with the ITS community in order to develop practical and useful mechanisms that enable the effective application of existing and innovative digital twins of the roads environment through integration and coordination. And I could justify each of the words in that, but I'm not going to, because we have the UDG meeting this afternoon. That's a much better place to discuss this, but I'll leave that thought, and we may even represent that this afternoon for discussions. What does that mean? Well, what we actually need to deliver in order to do that is the same kind of things that UTMC has done in the past. It's technical resources in terms of documentation, specifications, guidance, and so on. There's a bit more to it than that, though. I think that there is more future-looking stuff, again, building on the kind of visions that Chris was putting forward in terms of how do we do things in future. And that will be more technical, because UTMC is still a technology concept. So where are we going with things like communications networks? Where are we going with things like connectivity? Where are we going with things like artificial intelligence? Of course, we will need to do that collaboratively, which will mean meetings. It will mean understanding what the requirements are likely to be, to the extent that they are consistent across the community. All this is handle-turning stuff, but it's absolutely necessary and of the essence. Guidance on procurement was mentioned earlier, best practices and so on. And again, this is very much traditional UTMC positioning, all free and open access. We still have no feeling that there is a need to impose anything, no justification for charging for access. So what we want is for whatever comes out of this process to be publicly available, not only to the UK but around the world, and it is doing that. So this is a lot. Again, we need to make sure that we're working effectively with others. We are not going to be developing all the digital twin materials. A lot of that stuff will lie within the functional communities that have a better handle on specific areas. We have no interest really in trying to tell, for example, the good folks that in Andy's group are doing focused specific things to do with capturing and delivering data in the connected context, how to do that. What we might have an interest in is saying that would be really useful information if you could pass it to this other lot doing parking management or environmental monitoring or something that Spatula isn't by itself doing. Okay. Here are some specifics that we might or might not do. We might profile congestion data to be published as open data. That would be something which we would look to be doing with someone like Artsim. We might provide guidance on the use of AVL in UTC to optimize signal priority. That would be something we might do with Artig. Bus information is Artig's game. Traffic information is not. It's maybe more Topaz's game. How do they link together? We don't know. But there is a functional need there as well to do with who is responsible for doing what optimization, what are the goals of the optimization that's being achieved there. Is it just to get the buses through quicker, or is it also to maintain traffic flow? Probably is. And how do you trade off those requirements across a network, and so on. Common spec for ANPR API to enforcement services. Don't think that's being done at the moment. I could be wrong. I think that there is a technical aspect of running ANPR for traffic purposes. The police and others would quite like to have some of that. What do they need? Don't know. Is anybody looking at that? Don't know. We did have, once upon a time, a UTMC working group looking at this, which was working collaboratively with the Home Office. And maybe that's a place to pick this up. And several others. Things we won't produce are things which are already being done by somebody else. So the interface between traffic management centres and traffic light controllers is not our bag. That's straightforward Topaz material. We will leave them to do that. Similarly, the interface between public service vehicles and traffic light controllers for the purposes of bus priority, that already exists as a historical UTMC collaboration with Artig. Artig hold that specification. And requirements for the glossy UI, well, we had some of that from Andy. There are various other exemplars for that. I don't know what the answer is on UI, but it's not really our game. There is one, those are potential specifics. There's one actual specific which has already been flagged, which is the digital controller interface specification that was mentioned earlier. The Spatula team developed or are developing this specification. And as a first step towards ratifying that with the community, they would like to know whether the base layer of that, which is the numbering scheme that they have proposed for signals around the country, actually matches the requirements of authorities without disrupting things too much. So their job is to hold the development aspect there. We're not going to get involved in that. What we are going to do is to see whether it works. So our job was, in this case, simply to run the consultation. What do you think then, community? We had a consultation, 4 open questions, which were these things, roughly presented. Does the DCIS concept have potential benefit? Do you believe that having a digital control interface specification would be a good thing? And the paperwork that Spatula developed outlined a whole list of possible good things that they thought were reasonable. Secondly, does the phased development that was being proposed for DCIS make sense? A mechanistic, a process-oriented question. Thirdly, and on the nuts of the consultation, does the proposed signal numbering scheme that we have identified and suggested work for you? Are there problems with it? Do you think it will do the job? And then a general open, is there anything we could do better? And the results of the jury were these. So the first question was, the first one I need to say was that there was a reasonable balanced set of responses from users and suppliers. Some of those we dug a bit more on, but we got a good number of local authority respondents and a decent response from some representative suppliers as well. And the key conclusions were these. General, slightly cautious support, saying, yeah, okay, I mean, DSIS sounds like it would be in principle a good thing, but where are we going on this? I need to know more. Suppliers were broadly neutral. This is my reading. We can do what you would, but we need paying for it. Not unreasonable. Users see potential benefits, but have some concerns on potential future costs. The budget point, again, okay, we can see this might be useful, but we're going to have to do stuff here, aren't we? We're going to have to potentially buy new things. We're going to have to maintain new data sets. What does this mean for us? And there was a common perspective that actually, yeah, that running this phase one, just look at the numbering scheme was a very sensible thing to do, and it seems that works. There's a lot more technical work to be done within the Spatula group about what it is that's actually going to be communicated between signal controllers and the centre, but just knowing what the identifier for the signal controller is a good start. And I know I'm going through this in some detail, but this is your opportunity to get the response to the consultation, so that's the reason. Question one, do you believe that creating a DSIS specification has potential for benefit? Everybody said yes. Some suggestion that the potential benefits might be a bit oversold and focus more on connected automated vehicles in the longer term, but many of the benefits were just, yeah, tick that one off. We recognise that one. Do you believe the proposed four-step approach is sensible? Phased approach universally supported, but comments were widely made that you can't just decide this specification then walk away from it. There is going to be continuing development work to be done here. The third question was the one that got the most in-depth responses, unsurprisingly. Does the proposed numbering scheme create risks or problems with your current systems? There were a significant number of detailed concerns put forward. And I've said there, a majority have said one or more of the following: it will need to keep and maintain my local numbering system. I'm not gonna just throw away what I've got here and deal with your new one tomorrow. It will not work with my current asset management system. I already have a system to do that, and it's going to cause concerns. It will cost me to do this, both initially and ongoing. I need to populate this thing and I need to maintain it. It might lose me revenue. Complex junctions will raise some issues. It's not sufficiently clear in various ways. Now, some of these concerns, I think, are a bit previous because they don't relate to the architecture that's been put forward tentatively in the way it's done. Some of it will relate more to later stages of the consultation where you get to the, so how is this actually going to work thing. But the numbering scheme itself, I think there is a general perception on this side of the fence, isn't dramatically affected so long as it meets the requirements of not interrupting other people, not disturbing your existing asset management system functionality and so on. But there are ways to do that. On the fourth question, there were also a whole bunch of rather useful bits of constructive feedback. So who is responsible for holding and maintaining the road regulator ID database? needs to be centralised, it said. So we can be our road regulator in our system, but who's going to tell us that that's what we are and what happens when you have mergers and whatnot? Need for change control processes at all levels. Is this going to be a statutory requirement? Am I going to have to do this at some point? If so, when? And what the problem is going to be? What are the enforcement regime going to be? Again, very early days to get to that, but it's a legitimate question. The business case, is there a business case for me to do this now? What are the incentives? Again, the user perspective thinking, well, we're doing this, you've asked us to do this, but actually the benefits of doing this largely don't accrue to us. Maybe on the asset management side being a bit easier, but beyond that, not much. And then a question about road operators that are not local authorities and don't have an obvious way of being regulated in that way. So there's a whole bunch of things to think about there for the spatula team. So the next steps on that, Andy and his group are going to take on board the technical commentary. I'm sure they already have to a large extent. None of this is new to them. And continue with the next phase of work. DFT have some homework to do as well, I think, in terms of some of those broader questions. Decide how much it benefits it believes in the potential benefit of UK PLC. Are you going to actually nudge this forward, meaning probably money, or is this something you're just going to wait and see what happens with the next rounds of consultation? Either is a perfectly plausible response. Don't know where you feel on that. Decide how far the implementation of DSIS numbering can be left to the market without further sponsorship. And then take a view on the management comments in, for example, the maintenance of the central database. I find it hard, personally, to believe that there is going to be a way of coordinating this thing as a unique structure across the UK without DFT involvement. But maybe there's another way of doing it. And our job as UTMC is just to keep this sort of refereeing role in the middle to say, okay, market, what do you think of the way that things are now currently going, whether we're talking about the policy directions of it or about the technical content. Don't know what the next step is, and you can tell us, I'm sure, at some point about what the likely timeline is for the next iterations of the DSIS, but that's where we stand at the moment. All right, enough on DSIS. That's lots of detailed technical stuff. Steve said I would be presenting something about the current draft plan for 2023-24. It hasn't changed since you last saw it, yeah, which was in the autumn, and it's these things. We have 6 work packages outlined, of which work package 1, management coordination, is the just keeping things running thing. Work packages 4, 5 and 6 are a little bit more futuristic, but work packages 2 and 3 are the key ones at the moment, and those are the ones that we feel at the moment most schizophrenic about. So work package 2 is really setting up the structures for what this integrating digital twins in the future might entail over the 2020s and beyond. But then work package 3, core systems review and revision, is but what do we got now? We have the current UTMC specification, all of which needs to be gone through and either kept, revised, junked, or passed over to somebody else. Both of those need doing. And that's the task for the UDG as a whole. This is not something that me and Steve are just going to declare. Not something we can do, actually. He doesn't have the skills, and I certainly don't. I'm assuming. So that's your job, or at least those of you who are going to be involved in the UDG working group. So what does that mean? Well, this is this is a very straight blobby diagram picture for how I think the UDG is going to need to work. There will be a thing called the TTF working group. There already is. That's the 59 or whatever it is members, contacts that Steve has already represented, and anybody else who says, yeah, I'm actually quite interested in being involved in that. You can't run a program with an open discussion among 59 people. We believe that something a bit like the way it was run in the past, with a much smaller management group who are able to take strategic decisions on prioritization, direction, and so on, is going to be necessary. That's the green blob at the top. How we get to that out of the 59 is to be determined. And that's, our main challenge at the moment in terms of governance of this thing is that how do you believe this should work? Previously, when UDG was a subscription organisation, this was an elected panel under a constitution which said how many representatives should be coming from the public sector, how many from the private sector. I don't think that is likely to be relevant at this stage. My initial feeling is that what might sensibly happen for the first year or so is that me and Steve, after discussion with DFT and others, might select a number of people to invite to the management group, which would ensure that kind of balance. We would ensure that we have a decent range of local authority members, obviously subject to their interest, representing METs, maybe highways, national highways, counties, unitaries, and also a decent range of suppliers representing both top-tier integrators and the functional specialists. Perhaps with one or two other representatives as well. Maybe 10, 12 people in that. That's a manageable size. Perhaps meeting quarterly, something like that. The doing stuff, though, that's a management group. The doing stuff would be in task groups that are looking at specific things. So we would have a task group looking at particular elements, looking at the environmental specification in the current UTMC structures, for example. Or looking at the architectural implications of the digital twin model that I gave you earlier. I don't know yet how many task groups we might need to be kicking off this year. We can't do everything at once, but we do need to start some of them. Out of that, we have the wider interest group. That interest group will certainly contain the whole of the TTF working group sign-up list. It may be that many people who have signed up only want to be an interest group, so they want to be notified what's happening, asked for comments when something is available for review, but otherwise left alone. It may be that there are others in the TTF who are interested in being notified of such things without necessarily participating in the working group. This is for you to decide. So you've got homework, everybody's got homework. And then outside that, there's the TTF, wider TTF and world at large, people who we publish things to, say, here is now what we have on this. So that's our thoughts about where we go on that. But as I say, that is for the UDG meeting this afternoon, 5 o'clock in the Magnum Suite, to do two things. One is for you to say, no, we hated your presentation, Mark. We think you should be doing things this way or otherwise. And more focused to talk about the principles of UDG governance. Whether you like the outline that I've put, it will just be a starter phase, but we do need to get something. All right, that's me and that's UTMC, I think, done. Thank you.